Hello listener, and a very happy new year. We're back, recharged after the winter break, injury-free, and ready to hit peak performance for Russia this summer. It's a big one this week. Along with our highs and lows of FIFA 18 so far, we ask if FUT Champs is causing burnout. Are online squad battles the answer? Plus, guest FUTHEAD Luke on his frustration with the skill gap bandwagon, our economist on trading thoughts ahead of Team of the Year and winter ones to watch. Oh, and of course we round up a cracking Team of the Week. I'm your host Ben, and you're listening to the FUT Weekly podcast. And to do all that, what a star-studded cast we have to start 2018. Firstly, we've got a very familiar voice in the FUT economist, aka Jamie.
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello indeed. And then we've got a man who really has his ear to the ground on everything FUT. I mean, it is his job. It's FUTHEAD's Luke Zimmerman.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
No, thank you. It's an absolute pleasure. So what I want to start with is, I feel like on Twitter and the various other kind of streams, I suppose, I'm seeing maybe a bit of burnout or kind of a lack of interest in FUT. I mean, I put out a poll on @FUTWeeklyPod, which got around 500 responses, and it did suggest the same. I'll go into sort of specifics later. But Luke, are you noticing this yourself through your own social media streams?
Yeah, I think honestly the last time I was on with you guys, I talked about, one, I guess how much I liked the game. This was at the capture event, so it was not, it was very close to the release version, if not the actual release version of the game. That I felt, gameplay was improved, it had been smooth, a lot of stuff kind of had felt like additional polish added from the previous version of the game, which is always welcome. But my one lingering concern was that there wasn't maybe enough new to engage the power users and really help the people that play the game the most feel like that there was something kind of worth their, the grind necessary. Like FUT Champions was brand new, it was shiny. We had squad battles this year, which certainly I think we saw with YouTubers and influencers caught their attention early, but maybe it's something that they're still sticking with now, especially the grind of having to play, 44 squad battles or whatever the number is, and then 40 FUT Champions matches per week on top of that. That's a lot of time and a lot of games and a lot of stress. I think kind of what we're seeing is this burnout, whether it be from pros, whether it be from hardcore power users like the ones that listen to this podcast, the folks that we see on FUTHEAD, the folks that we see on /r/FIFA, were guys that like the game, people that champion it, people that have played the series, love to, even invest in the series, be it time or money, FIFA points, whatever. They're not getting that same kind of ROI in terms of satisfaction with the game this year. And they don't understand why, and so they lash out at, whether it be gameplay, whether it be at servers, whether it be at, whatever the kind of buzz frustration of the moment is. And I think a lot of the root of those frustrations is just that while the game is solid, I think that it's a good game, and it's certainly, I think we'll get into this a little bit, may never have been popular than it is now, at least amongst the more casuals. For the hardcores, there's just not enough new, I think, to really keep them plugged in and engaged, maybe as there has been in the past.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite an interesting point. I mean, Jamie, you're all coming from it at more of a trading angle. That maybe most of the people that you kind of interact with generally. Do you think that is something that's sort of equally feeling the burnout at this time of year, or what do you think?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, SBCs were something that really, catalyzed a massive growth in the trading community. And FIFA17 was a really, really good year for starting a Twitter account and gaining a bunch of followers and
did someone do that?
Yeah, someone might have done that. Someone might have been myself. And I think what happened this year is, I think EA, when they're doing the SBCs, like, it's kind of like one of those things where it's like, if it's not broke, don't fix it kind of thing. And they haven't really varied the content from last year as of right now. I think maybe we might grant EA a little bit of patience because we're not even at Team of the Year yet. So I would anticipate that we're going to have some sort of change coming up. But I do think people are getting just a little bit burned out. I think one thing that, going back to what Luke was talking about, I think the casual engagement is pretty high. But as we were saying, the burnout for some of those power users, a lot of the content creators themselves are starting to get burned out. And I think that's something that is, you see, like, the big streamers are switching to games like Fortnite and stuff like that. And while that might not necessarily have like an immediate impact on the engagement of the casual users, I think over time, if casual players see that they're the guys that they look up to, the streamers, the YouTubers, are not playing as much of the game or not playing FUT Champs, for someone like like a casual player, they might say like, well, if he's not playing it, then why am I playing it? Why am I putting all this time and money into it? So I think like long term, that could be something that could be a worry for EA.
Something really, I think, in terms of maybe important isn't quite the right word, but at least in terms of like perspective of sort of the continuum of FIFA or the lifespan of a FIFA, right? That you hit on is important is that this is still January, right? This is barely the first third of the game. I think we can look back when team of the season comes around in April or May, whenever it may be, or towards the World Cup, if they do anything special for that, be it in FUT or if there's a DLC like there was in the last World Cup. I think then we'll have a clearer picture of like, oh, okay, they did this really well, or they really left this on the table. Right now, I think we're all just impatient because the game, and it's not like necessarily even a conscious thing. It's just the fact of the matter is, well, the gameplay, whether you love it or hate it, the actual content has not deviated a ton for the most hardcore users. So I think we're all a little impatient right now, and it coincides with, like you mentioned, okay, we have this path to glory, but it's basically a once to watch. Like what new we've gotten isn't necessarily been groundbreaking.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Like completely changing, reinventing the wheel with something like FUT Champs was such a huge thing last year. Towards the end, that sort of started to falter. And then when the format essentially remains the same the following year, and actually, yes, the gameplay's changed, and I suppose a lot of people like to say it hasn't, but if you go back, like I have, and play last year's game, it does feel pretty different. You think, well, if I'm grinding away and getting the same results every week, isn't that one of the first kind of signs of madness or something, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result? And then eventually you'll think, well, maybe it's time to sort of step back from it when actually I'm not able to kind of push that much further into it. But just going back to the poll itself, we've got 19% of our listeners saying that they're the same level of engaged as they were last year, and 35% saying they're more engaged. So you've still got quite a good chunk who are actually saying they're more interested in the game than last year, which, I don't know, looking at Twitter, some of the bigger influencers, you would say that probably wasn't the case at all. So it is worth noting that. And then you've got, on the other end of the spectrum, 33% who are less engaged and 13% who are hardly engaged at all. I wonder whether part of the sort of reason for this has actually been the success of some of the competitors, sort of EA's competitors in producing interesting games like Fortnite and also PUBG, which a lot of influencers, as you said, have really kind of taken a shine to, and opening people's eyes to something like Fortnite, which is free, may well be kind of impacting this. But whether that's the case for your average FUT player who doesn't get involved with influencers, I'm not sure that's necessarily the case. I don't know whether, Luke, you have any insights.
Well, I will say a year ago, we definitely saw the likes of Castro and some folks playing games in the lead up to TOTS and Team of the Year that weren't FIFA. And I think it's good for them to diversify kind of their gaming portfolio and their interest. And it's just, I think it's healthy for everyone. I think we see so much vitriol on Twitter. We see it, in the Discords that we're in. We see it on, communities that otherwise can sometimes really champion the game, like FUTHEAD or Reddit or any of the other sites out there. I think something worth keeping in mind is that it's healthy and normal to want to do things that are necessarily not FIFA. We all love FIFA and we all spend time and money and invest in it. But if you're feeling super angry and frustrated, the solution to me isn't to rush to Twitter to harass FIFA producers and tell them that they're thieves or whatever you want to, worse things that people say to them. I think you should just go play Fortnite or go play PUBG or whatever. It's not necessarily unhealthy. We'll have to, I think, it's just I can't remember if it was FIFA 17 or FIFA 16. Castro was really, really hardcore into something that wasn't FIFA. And the second the big, Team of the Year, Team of this, I remember if it was Team of the Knockout Stage or TOTS itself dropped, bam, pivot right back. And, his audience was right there and ready to go to it. So I think when they have these big engaging promos for the kind of more hardcores, that's fine. But filling the gaps in between when you're not necessarily focused on, some of the bigger releases is fine. It's I think you mentioned it a little casually, but the structure of FUT Champions is such a grind, and it really is targeted specifically the way it's designed is for pro players. They want to have this competitive entry model for the pros that the rest of us have taken a shine to it. I don't think it's something that necessarily that EA even planned for or accounted for. And if the game is targeted, if that mode is targeted as a qualification method and just happens to be enjoyed by more casuals or, not casuals isn't the right word, I should say hardcore good players that aren't necessarily professional level good is probably the right way to classify it. There's just not as much emphasis for them, which culminates in I played all 200 games in last month's FUT Champions, and it was a grind. I'm not going to play this month because I'm burned out. Is that something that they have to design for? Is that something that they need to give us a new mode next year to to account for those players? Because like seasons is something that we've all been that have been playing FUT since FIFA 13, FIFA 12, FIFA 11, whatever. Seasons is kind of passe in its own right? So I'm personally selfishly hoping that we get something for the in-between, for the hardcores that maybe aren't pros but are tired of seasons next year. But in the meantime, we'll just have to wait and see. I think maybe some of the content that comes out in the months ahead will kind of figure out how to keep us engaged. At least that's kind of what I'm hoping.
Yeah, and I mean, we've got a big year ahead of us with the World Cup as well. We know EA are going to put out content for that. So maybe it's almost in EA's interest for there to be somewhat of a lull at this stage just to recharge the batteries, like your Bundesliga winter break or whatever, just to get people ready for the sort of, I don't know, the push towards the end of
I think as much passion and as much just sort of demand that we've seen for either something new, something more engaging, something more compelling that we've seen early in this FIFA, which I don't think is necessarily super dramatically different from previous versions of the game.
Yeah, that's another thing too. I do think if we had like a time machine, we could go back. I think we're going to see some of the, maybe 17 was different because the FUT Champs was such a new dynamic and SBCs were such a new dynamic. But if you go back to 16 and, in the FIFAs before that, I think we have the exact same sort of dynamic going on. It's just repeating itself, and we have a very short-term memory. It's like a goldfish, the community.
Yeah. I know what you mean exactly. If it was a 15 to 16, you'd be seeing a similar kind of thing. And we've kind of got over the fact that there's loads of new content added in 17 and it's still kind of continuing into 18. And they've tried to make sort of changes to it, but ultimately the basis of what's engaging people in the game is kind of the same thing. I mean, my big problem with FUT Champs and people saying, well, it was made for pros is, well, they've put their dedicated servers into doing FUT Champions, and it means that I can't really play divisions anymore because it feels horrible in comparison to FUT Champs, which is slightly frustrating because I feel like I'm kind of hooked into FUT Champs because if I exit playing FUT Champs, my connection is so much worse that it doesn't feel like I'm playing the same game. So that's a little bit frustrating. Yeah. But maybe that's maybe I'm lucky for having such a good connection in FUT Champs.
One thing I was thinking about, and this is whether or not EA is going to do something like this. It's totally up to them and stuff like that. But what if they change the ranking system? I put a tweet out about this. I got a bit of traction. What if they change the ranking system and the reward tier system so where it was more of a projection-based thing? So obviously they'd have to tier it, but someone that finishes 18-1, for example, might be rewarded with better packs and better coin values than someone who goes 18-22. So that people that might necessarily have time to finish all 40 games, or they're not pushing to qualify, they might just say they're doing really well. Maybe you could carry over the skill points from the previous week, and then you could have the matchmaking and stuff like that carry over for the previous week, and then you could have it so that they have the skill level and stuff like that they're supposed to be playing just right off the bat. But they don't have to finish all 40 of the games to get a reward that might be enticing enough for them to sit down and play 20 games or something like that. Whereas like for someone like me, I feel like there is no point in playing FUT Champs unless I'm just trying to get a good, clean, crisp gameplay. Other than that, I don't feel incentivized because I know I'm not going to finish 40 games, so I'm not going to get the rewards that I might want. So something like that where it's obviously you're going to have the exponentially increasing rewards as you play more games. But something like that could incentivize a good player that might necessarily have the time to finish 40 games to play FUT Champs again.
I feel like this is maybe slightly influenced by your performance in Weekend League not so long ago, perhaps.
It's very influenced by performance in 2 Weekend Leagues ago. Yeah, I started out. I think it was I went like 18-3 or something like that, which was way above my. I think
it might have even been 18-2 actually. I think it might be.
Yeah, slightly... no, you're right. Yeah, which I mean I was punching above my weight. I'll be completely honest, but. If I could have been rewarded for that, I only ended up finishing 25 games, which was sort of disappointing. But
yeah, I think then you get into this kind of debate over should it be time that's rewarded or should it be skill that's rewarded. So someone playing 40 games in a weekend, they're obviously really committing to the game, even though they're not that good. So shouldn't we give them a good reward? I guess they will get a good reward anyway. But it's kind of hard to know. What are your thoughts on? I guess that is kind of, we're debating now how they could slightly alter FUT Champs maybe to make it a bit more engaging for people. Is there something they could do you think, Luke?
I would love, I don't know how trivial this is, so it's easy for me to say, they should absolutely do this without me knowing how complex the code would be, how much time, how much bandwidth they have. But I think if we saw them introduce something where you get rewards for playing all 40 games, for playing 2 weekends in a row, for playing an entire month's all 160 games. Like, what if you got an exclusive player just as kind of a monthly objective kind of thing? I think that would be a way to keep people engaged and a way to kind of keep people plugged in. Will that fix burnout or frustration? Absolutely not. It might lead to more because people will feel like they have to get those rewards because they're going to see their favorite YouTubers or personalities or streamers or pros have those players. But
all their opponents,
yeah, exactly. That if they're good enough, absolutely. I think that could factor in. So I don't know that it's an easy solve in terms of solving for burnout. There are a lot of different factors at play, and I think kind of one thing I was alluding to though is that we're judging kind of everything, and this is very literally the topic of this podcast on what we've seen in the first 4 months of gameplay. I think FIFA 18's tombstone will be christened or whatever when the game is over, right? So, or even it's like TOTS, right? We'll know FIFA 18 strength and weakness is better than what we're seeing right now is a pretty incomplete picture. But in terms of like a solve for just some kind of variance in format or rewards or something, it wouldn't take much, I think, to get some of the more hardcores appeased. Is certainly interesting. I don't know the solve. I don't think it's easy. I understand where EA is coming from in terms of the challenges and difficulties of fixing this, but maybe in their perspective, like, I don't have the engagement numbers. I don't know, like, if the whole point is to qualify the best pros. Well, it's certainly not good that we've seen pros kind of rage quit. They're not even just FUT Champs, but like the profession out of burnout or stress or whatever the case may be. If in their opinion they're getting the best pros to their qualifying events, the LAN events or whatever you want to call them, the IRL ones, then maybe it's not broken. And that's it sucks for us that are like these like hardcore passionate players that are. And I think this is actually something I've said before, kind of elsewhere, and I want to repeat it. If you qualify for FUT Champs, you're automatically like a top 12% player in FIFA. As unbelievable as that sounds, it is really hard to win 4 games in a row. Now, there's always exceptions to the rule. You could have 4 early rage quits. You could have 4 terrible opponents. But by and large, you're going to have to beat at least one pretty good player to win 4 in a row, period. And from there, if you're gold 1, if you're elite 3, we have these perspective, and we see pros do this all the time. I lost to a trash player. Well, you lost to a gold 2 player. Like, that shouldn't happen very often, but those guys are good, relatively speaking. That's a top 5% player in FIFA. And I think it's really easy to lose sight of the forest for the trees. And you wind up with this, something that you guys were alluding to, but didn't necessarily hit on, that I'll touch on now, is there's this like performance expectation bias where, okay, I think that I am a gold 1 player. If I do anything less than gold 1 or anything above gold, or if I don't get gold 1 or better, I'm going to be irate, and that's going to contribute to my not enjoying the game mode or gameplay as much. And you see this with pros too. I didn't go 40 for 40, so I hate this. This sucks. Gameplay has never been more trash. Every little lag, every little response thing. Not that those things shouldn't necessarily be fixed. I think they should be a point of emphasis for the production team as much as they're able. Those become what you fixate on when you don't reach that threshold of performance that you think you're capable of. So it's fascinating. I don't know the easiest solve. I think like we're so acclimated to the season, so like, all right, 14 points, 20 points, like whatever. Like, it's this more like steadfast goal where like 20 wins is that's like 60 points, right? Like, it's 25 wins, 30 wins, 35 wins, 40 wins. It's kind of crazy to think about, like, and it's all in a span of like 10, 12 hours of gameplay, right? So it's interesting. I don't know the easiest solve. It would seem like just the easiest PR win would be to make FUT Champs 4 days or something like that. Like, that seems so low hanging fruit. I guess the concern is that you'll skew results with pros more easily able to get a higher winning percentage, maybe. But I'm not. I
think I've mentioned this before, and actually, quickly, one of the things that I sort of mentioned earlier and we've touched on, but I think one of the problems with the burnout, certainly for people playing FUT Champions regularly, and certainly myself, is the idea that you come into the new game, you think, oh, new game, different game mechanics, maybe they're for me, maybe I'll be able to push my weekend league performance that much further. And like, yes, I have to an extent, but actually my I think my win rate at the end of last year was actually better than it has been this year. So yeah, I'm not sure whether that's perhaps contributed, because obviously when you're playing a game, you always want to progress and you always want to do slightly better. And in FUT Champs, the format doesn't really quite allow for that in a way, especially for those players who are playing a lot anyway, so they've already kind of reached their peak perhaps.
That is one thing I've seen people talking about a lot, is that they can't get any better, or they're consistently finishing in the same exact spot every weekend, deviating a couple of wins. And that is something, I mean, as you're saying, Ben, that's really frustrating. And I just wonder if there's some sort of maybe not a hidden effect, influence going on here, but we're saying that people are getting burned out. Maybe there's excuse me.
That's it.
Maybe there's a player base of more casual players that are getting burned out on FUT Champs, and they're not playing as much. So the first couple games that you play might necessarily be against the easiest opponents that used to play in the beginning of the year. So as we get deeper into FUT Champs, or deeper into the cycle rather, maybe the player base that is playing FUT Champs is getting more competitive, which may be why the players that maybe they're getting better in terms of just skill, but they're playing against better players because the player base is thinned out to just the most hardcore high skill players, which could be why people are seeing that they're not improving, which it leads to this sort of snowball where they get burned out and then more people drop out, and then it's just kind of circles from there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Like, I think the player base, it essentially kind of eats itself over time, because people who are losing loads don't want to carry on playing, but they're the kind of players that the next tier up are able to beat, and then they suffer the same thing, and so on and so on, which is a bit of an issue, and I don't know how they're ever going to kind of solve that problem. It may go on for as long as FUT Champs exists. My only idea for changing FUT Champs to reduce the number of games was to decrease the number of games to maybe like 25 or 30 a weekend. Probably 25 is I don't know, 30 is still a lot. And then your sort of top performing players go into a midweek league. So you're kind of, I guess they wouldn't quite all be pro players. Maybe they'd be like higher tier elite players as well, would go into like a midweek league where maybe they'd play 10 games or so against really high quality opposition, which would, stop people arguing that pros don't play top players. And then out of that, you'd then get your qualified players, but you'd also hopefully, I guess, make it a bit easier to an extent for players to qualify for the following weekend, because you wouldn't have so many top players messing about in the daily knockout, which would be quite nice in a way. So yeah, that's kind of my option for changing it a bit.
I quite like that idea.
Oh, and actually, while I'm getting to give my ideas on how I think they should change it, one of the other things that I quite like to see, I was thinking back to playing single matches, which, believe it or not, was one of the only ways to play FUT back in, I don't know, FIFA 12, etc. And actually that was incredibly fun. You'd be trying to maximize your coin total in those games, and the 5-0, just like squad battles now, would be the sort of optimal score, and you'd be able to get a certain number of coins because of that. And I was thinking maybe there's a way of expanding that out and expanding squad battles out into an online mode for your more casual online players. I'm sure that there'd be a way of doing it, and I think it would engage people, because you'd be trying to score goals. It wouldn't be such a negative experience perhaps, because goals mean points. So hopefully that could encourage some more fun gameplay, because to be honest, I like to score a nice goal as much as I do like to win, so something like that I'd certainly find enjoyable. Anyway, I feel like we could talk about this for probably the whole podcast. I think it's time to move on. Next, I'd like to discuss something a lot of our listeners are asking. Why is the quality of opposition so high, it seems, both in terms of the value of their team, but also their ability? I know we discussed the increase in sort of opposition quality a bit already, but Jamie, what are your thoughts on this?
I mean, one thing I just want to start with is if you had the average sort of dedicated, on Twitter, on Reddit, on FUTHEAD, watches YouTube videos, follows influencers. If you had that average player that does that, below basically us three, below the pro level player, but not a casual player. If you had us play the equivalent of our player type in FIFA 16. And you had them play FIFA18, say, just fast forward, we would absolutely smack them. Like, I think, just because of FUT Champs, like the training that essentially has, playing 40 games a weekend, I think we would destroy them. And that's not necessarily what you were asking, but...
No, that's a really good point. Yeah, so the idea that people are becoming more intelligent about the way they play the game, basically, because they're forced into it.
Exactly. But yeah, no, I mean, just going back, circling to your original question, it is sort of interesting to see just how much better in terms of like coin value and competitiveness people's teams are this year compared to what they were last year. I think there's two big factors that are going into it, maybe three. And the first is squad battles, the equivalent of our player base, people that do sit down and play the squad battle games during the week. That's a very easy way to make coins. So obviously that's adding to people's buying power. I think the second is people are paying a lot more attention to trading this year, trading and investing. Pro players are getting into it, big influencers are getting into it. They're talking about it on stream. Guys like Run the Foot Market are pulling thousands of concurrent viewers talking about the market. People are very interested in it, and while it does make trading in some types of trades a little bit more difficult because there might be too many people invested and there might be over-investing and overselling, I think a lot of people are sort of taking advantage and milking the casual player base that might not necessarily know what's going on and why player prices are moving the way that they are. And then the third, I think people are a lot more conscious about what they spend their coins on this year. Last year, I think the number of people that did the Footmas SBCs last year, the player selection was a little bit different and maybe a little bit more incentivizing last year. But this year, I saw people being very, very selective about the players that they did. People are much more selective about doing Player of the Month. The SBCs. And I think that is contributing to people having better teams. And if they are doing an SBC, it might just be for the prime icons instead of a Player of the Month Salah, for example.
Yeah, definitely. And Luke, would you concur?
Yeah, I think so. Certainly there's this phenomenon that was highlighted by Malcolm Gladwell, who Jamie is an economics student. I'm sure all economics professors hate Gladwell because he puts a lot of attention on economics, but does it in like the most oversimplified ways possible. That said, we'll give some credence to his, one of his theories about the 10,000 hour rule that says that if you do anything for 10,000 hours, you achieve like a professional level of competency. And while I think that's been mostly disproven by, social behavioral economists and sociologists and folks that specialize in those fields, there's probably some truth to it, or at least the idea that if you spend that much time on anything, you're going to get pretty good at it. And I see this a lot with the YouTubers and folks like that prior to FUT Champs, prior to squad battles, these guys, like as of last year, were like really coming into their own as players. Like Castro is a really good FIFA player, and Bateson is a really good FIFA player, and all these guys that make a living, making content about the game. And the reason is like, they weren't this level when they started. They were probably good because they loved the game and they played it a bunch, but the amount of time that goes in to creating that kind of content or streaming 8 hours a day, 5-6 days a week, it just makes you good. And I think to a lesser extent, on a smaller, like more micro level, we're seeing playing, I played FUT Champs the first, I want to say 5 months last year, every single week for 5 months. Like, RIP my loved ones and family. How I managed to hold down a job is anyone's guess, but I played, that's an insane amount of games. Like even if it's just 160, which some weekends it was 200, or some, I guess months, weekends I should say, it was 200. We're talking 700, 800 games over 5 months, whereas that might be how much I played on an entire previous FIFA. So if you get these extra repetitions, no matter what your skill level is, you're going to improve. Like there's no way to play 800 FIFA games in 5-6 months without improving. And so we're seeing these burnouts contribute to the caliber of player. Like sure, there are some pros hanging it up or playing a little bit less, but those guys are probably going to have more incentive to play more. And some of the high end, folks like us, like hardcores, are sticking with it because they are that dedicated or that completist or whatever you want to say it. But you have these like more intermediary hardcores or lower tier on the spectrum of hardcores who might not have the drive or the burn to push through. You said yourself, like you're not playing all your games, and I'm not going to play FUT Champs this month. So like we're now part of that demographic. But when we do play, there's just fewer of us playing. So the ones that are left around are probably just by very nature going to be more competitive, better skilled, more dedicated. And so I think we are seeing not only on the competitive circuit or, as competitive as you want to say, like the sub elite or sub professional levels are, like we mentioned earlier, it's still top 12% of FIFA players. That top 10% or whatever, excluding the pros, top 11% is harder than it was last year. Ben and I were both saying, we're winning less games than we were last year, and we've been playing more. So, is that what does that say? Is it just the super teams? I think it's a combination of both the super teams from all the factors you mentioned, which really hit the nail on the head, and then just the fact that people are better, and then there are fewer really hardcores doing it all the time. So it's interesting. I mean, it's just the frustrations and stuff that we're voicing is very like top, upper class first world FIFA problems, right? Because like I think
I see what
I don't have the numbers, and I'm not privy to them. EA hasn't like given them to me or anything, but we've seen certainly the sales. They've had record sales. We know that packs are flying out of promos faster than ever before.
Yeah.
So I think the average FIFA player has never been more into it, has never been more dedicated, has never been, putting more time and more money into it. But the hardcores, maybe we just don't have as much of a carrot as they do. Like it's the new smell, the new car smell is still new to them. Like maybe they've only been playing for a year, maybe this is their first FIFA, maybe this is their second, third, whatever. For those of us that have been playing 5, 6, 7, or even more, like it's an interesting challenge for EA to have to solve.
Yeah, and let's talk about something which I've identified as being sort of the phrase of the start of FIFA 18, skill gap. Something that just a little bit of a frustration, I think, for myself. And I know, Luke, you've got a view on this, which you've got an argument on this, and I think it's probably something that would be good to hear.
You got to give me a trigger warning before saying those words. Skill gap to me is the most misused buzz term in the FIFA community today. What skill gap means to the Gold 3 player on Twitter is not at all what skill gap means to Huge Gorilla, right? Like there is, I think, in competitive gaming and esports in general, this need, and one of the big controversial one that I think was shared very out of context was the Street Fighter V thing. Like I don't think that EA or FIFA is experiencing that same phenomenon at all, where it's like you're not going to have some dude off the street who plays FIFA with buddies in his dorm is not going to beat Huge Gorilla. And that was like the skill gap controversy in fighting games, is that the aberrations were glaring. The aberrations in FIFA is that you have Gold 2, Gold 1 players beating a Gorilla or whatever. Should that never happen? Maybe. That's a completely different argument, though, versus just a regular Joe losing. And then for the guys on social media, skill gap is I'm not beating the Bronze 2, Silver 1 people as authoritative as I feel I should. And so we're really quick. We're not talking about the same thing in any of these arguments. It's the same term being used similarly, but in very different contexts with very different meanings. So it's how to even define what is skill gap. It's just like, what if I was to tell you that, and I don't have this data, so this is just completely out of my rear, but what if I was to tell you that there were fewer kickoff goals scored in FIFA 18 than any FIFA in the history of online FIFA? Would that mean that the kickoff glitch is imaginary, or it's priming bias, or it would really change how we had that conversation? And EA ostensibly has data on this stuff, so they have the data on quote unquote skill gap. They have the data on some of the glitches that we want them to fix. So it's really hard to give anyone the benefit of the doubt, especially someone that you have given so much time and money to. But hypothetically, assuming, this is a big assumption and a big ask, but if you give, the competitive folks the benefit of the doubt, or you give the gameplay people the benefit of the doubt, sometimes their decisions on why or why not, or when to fix something or not fix something is data driven. So, it's really hard to diagnose. I don't know what the proper, it's hard for me to weigh in on the controversies in general. Like, I really understand where the pros are coming from when they're mad that matchmaking from one week to the other, especially during a qualifying month, has changed. Assuming that it does change, and it's not just some I have to assume, I have to take pros at face values if they're all getting harder games one weekend from the next, that it wasn't just, luck of the draw, right? There probably was some kind of tweak. I don't think that they're changing gameplay anymore because they're giving these extremely pedantically over-explained release notes now with every little change by request of the community, which I think is good. We should know everything that's changing, right? So I don't really honestly believe in phantom gameplay changes like used to be thrown around loosely. But I kind of am a subscriber to the theory that they are tweaking, maybe their ELO algorithm in terms of matchmaking, or if we see these pros, all of a sudden it takes them an hour to get a game because they want the system wants them to have to play a really hard opponent. It's tough to weigh on whether that's good or bad without full information, and we're just not going to ever have that. So,
EA ultimately striking a tough balance between matching people up based on skill and matching people up based on connection. and that is probably their biggest challenge, because once you are a pro player, there aren't many other pro players out there, so you've got to be matched up at the same time, location, all of those kind of things. It's very difficult, I think, for EA to manage that without creating some kind of scheduled hours maybe of pro play, if that makes sense, which they could possibly do.
I mean, we don't know necessarily that they're not, right? Like, even if one pro didn't get invited to that, who's to say that they didn't have like 5 or 6 guys like out in Vancouver or in London or wherever, like giving them that feedback. I don't know. I would certainly, we're saying, oh, this makes sense for them to do it. I think that they probably come to those same conclusions. So they probably do give pros hands-ons and just sort of like try to tweak it. Now, do they do that as much during like mid-game life cycle versus pre-release? I don't know. So
yeah, because we know that pros were doing testing before the game was released. We had hashtag Mike on, and he was saying that he'd played it very early on as sort of a pro player perspective, and so they are taking those views into account. I think just going to the skill gap thing, talking about connection as well, for me, I think that's one of the biggest issues, your connection with an opponent. If someone like Gorilla is playing on his very solid connection, I'm sure he has a good connection, he's playing most of his games, very good connection, very nice gameplay, all feels good, and then he plays a game maybe where the opponent has slight delay, but he also has slight delay in his opponent. So when Gorilla plays this opponent with his connection, which he's very used to, and Gorilla's not, then obviously Gorilla's going to have a bit of a significant disadvantage. He's not going to be able to do the things that he normally does. And although the guy he's playing, he can tell, I'm sure, isn't a great player, it's going to really restrict his ability to kind of make his advantage or press his advantage and beat him. So that in that situation, Gorilla may well say, oh, well, there's not a skill gap. But actually, connection, I think, just plays such a huge role. And it's a real shame, because if everyone was playing at a LAN event, every time they played FIFA, I think the game would be a very different beast.
Yeah, I think something that you hit on the nail on the head there, I think, is important to consider, is that there are these variables outside of EA's control. We can give EA flack for our perception that they're not upgrading the servers, even though they probably have from game to game or even mid-game life cycle. But once it gets to that home network, or once it gets to like certain internet service providers, or even it's from neighborhood to neighborhood, and I hear this all the time where I live in the United States, 1 or 2 block over, maybe on like a different relay system than mine, right? So like my internet service provider from the same ISP as my, same person in my neighborhood might be a very different experience. That stuff is just, there's not really any way for EA to control for, and it culminates in some of the frustrations. Like, you can't have everyone go to a private booth and play in some like post-apocalyptic, like it's not like some controlled EA runs the world Illuminati booth where they have dedicated fiber. That's not we don't have that, right? And so like, even if you have a pro go to an office, like the hashtag guys who we work with a lot, they have their own office, and we've seen some of the other pros teams offer dedicated business class fiber connections for their guys, which is great, but you can't control what's on the other end of that connection, right? So whether it's a poorly configured router, and you even have these pros and some people that are playing over wireless and are adamant that in 2018 wireless connection should be good enough to play games online like FIFA. Whether they should or not, I don't think it's really the point. It's clear that connectivity is going to be poorer than it is on wired or through LAN, and what it results in is like some of this weird speed up, slow down lag. I think I saw this one thing where someone had moved and was getting like 250 down, and a YouTuber replied, well, now you're going to deal with slow down lag. Like, your connection's too good for FUT Champs? Like, is that what? Like, I'm sure stuff like that exists to an extent, but the games aren't played in a vacuum, and there's so many variables outside of EA's control. It makes it really, I think, probably tough for them to have to defend some of these charges against them and some of the frustrations from players, but they're very reasonable frustrations that happen to all of us. It's just like, what can they do? I don't know. Coming
from someone who is in a situation where my wireless for at least this semester is going to be really poor, or was really poor this past semester. I live in a group house. I do have my own room, but there's 13 other people in the house. My ping is in the mid 70s on average. My download is anywhere between 6 and 8. So I have a really poor connection. It's very inconsistent. It goes out all the time. I get speed up lag. People say this all the time, but I literally get speed up lag on average once every 2 games. And I still am able to do well. So Ben, circling back to your first point, I think, I sort of, it's like a home field advantage for me. Like it really is. Like I play people that I know are just way better than me. Doing like, build up play that is just way above like anything that I could even, think about doing. Even playing players that are worse than me. And I'll beat them because, there are tactics that I've, developed, and we've talked about them before. Just playing very slow, methodical, in a way that is, you don't need, quick responsive reactions from your inputs that you're putting into your controller, and just tailoring that to, and being used to connections like that. I really do think I have a distinct advantage over players that are not used to that and maybe even better than me.
Yeah. No, I think that's totally true. And unfortunately, I think I've faced that in reverse because my connection used to be really bad. I used to get actually 5 megs, so even worse than what you had, and sort of similar ping. And since getting fiber and having a much better connection, to be honest, in terms of results, I haven't actually seen much of a difference. But in terms of quality of gameplay and enjoyment of the game, I mean, it's been a lot better since getting better internet. So I think that does just sort of reiterate the point. I think we should probably move on now. We want to just hear very briefly what your personal highlights have been so far this FIFA 18. Hello listeners, a couple of quick notices from me. Do follow us at FUTWeeklyPod on Twitter or email us futweekly@mail.com. We'd love to hear your comments and suggestions, even if they don't make it into the podcast. We do read them all. Also, it would be amazing if while you were listening to part 2, you could take a few minutes just to leave a review on iTunes or wherever you listen. If you search us up using FUT Weekly in your podcast provider, you'll be able to review us there. It really would be greatly appreciated. Right, back to the pod.
Personal highlight, I'm gonna sort of go back to my realm with the trading community kind of thing. I made a lot of coins, probably well over 1 million on investing for the Team of the Week SBCs. Invested in when they were pretty much at their lowest over the Footmas period. Initially, when we thought we were going to get Team of the Week SBCs, and then they didn't come, or they were like really delayed, I think was the situation. They didn't come out until the last day of Team of the Week 14. People were panic sold Team of the Week like investments, or like 83, 84s essentially, all the way down to like well below their lowest they've been all year. Invested in those at their low points, like 900 to 1,100 each, and then was able to sell them 3,300 and above. So made well over 1 million coins on that, and that's probably my highlight for the year.
Nice. And a nice sort of low risk method there for people.
Exactly.
And capitalizing on a bit of panic, always good.
Right.
Luke,
I just have to go ahead and preemptively apologize to our listeners and the both of you. Some of you guys saw on the FUTHEAD account, so you guys, these two know where I'm going, and I am sorry. This is in before EA rigs the packs. EA does not rig the packs. I never pack anything. Yeah, I never get anything good. I opened 500k packs, and then the 5th during Team of the Group stage, the day that came out, I pulled Team of the Group stage Ronaldo. I'm sorry, it's not. I will say this: it's not the best card I've ever pulled. I pulled Team of the Year Suarez, which is the highest rated item I've ever pulled out of a pack last year. Wow. But that was after like a get me divorced from my partner level spend. Like, I didn't, spending just $100 is, it's a lot for a lot of people. And it was the most I was willing to spend that weekend. I got extremely lucky with Ronaldo. When I pulled Suarez, I didn't feel like that was like an incredible achievement, just because like RIP my bank account, like I'm losing my home, I won't be able to eat nothing but dog food for a month. But no, I mean, that was a really, really crazy moment. I think especially because there was that Adrian Silva that was in packs that was like the troll one with Portugal striker, and I was fully expecting that. And the packs before I think I pulled one team in the group stage, and the other 3 100k packs, 400k packs before that, and it was some absolute like junk Russian discard one or something. So that absolutely blew my mind. It was, it's when you have a really cool pull, especially when it's like a Messi or Ronaldo, the guys like the cover stars past and present. I think those are always special, fun moments. In terms of like end game, if I've had anything as rewarding. I do remember one specific match. It was actually, I can't remember if it was last week or the weekend before, but it was during the past month in December for FUT Champs. I was trailing a guy 4-0, and let me tell you, when you play with Team of the Group stage, or when you play with Ronaldo in general, your opponents are going to be pretty much jerks because you have a really good player, which Okay, I get it. And so every goal this dude scored, going up 4-0, he did the Ronaldo celebration, watched all the replays, the whole 9 yards, ran to midfield shushing, and then did the Ronaldo. Like, it was the biggest, most exaggerated performance you could imagine. I was trailing 4-0 at half, and I came back and won 5-4 in the 94th minute. And you can imagine and
then you shushed. And
I'm not going to say I didn't, but no, I think I just, I don't think I messaged, I think I messaged him Merry Christmas or something like that, a little passive aggressive. And he did not appreciate that. But no, I think that was, for me in game, it was kind of nothing to lose. It made me really relaxed, and it probably made him overconfident. And he was not a bad player. I mean, certainly he'd gone ahead 4-0 on me. Not that I'm amazing or a world beater or anything, but I think for me, that was probably my in-game highlight so far, is having that massive comeback. And just I think I just put the controller down, stopped playing FUT Champs for a couple hours, and just came back and probably lost 3 of my next 4. But at least for that moment in time, I was feeling mighty good about my gameplay. Yeah.
On top of the world.
Last year, I had a similar thing on FIFA17 where a guy messaged me at halftime when he was 5-0 up saying, you're terrible, quit sort of thing. And to be honest, the reason why I hadn't been playing that well is because I was really distracted. I can't remember exactly what it was now, but in the second half, I demolished him and scored 8 goals. I sort of messaged him afterwards, something very, very gentle, not too aggressive, and the amount of vitriol I got back, considering the response, it was just incredible. I think he even rage quit, so it was an especially good moment, that. But this year, the highlight for me probably been playing with Ronaldinho again, because obviously he has been in the game in FUT in the past, but never nearly as good as that 89 card he has this year, which has just been great fun. It's nice to I guess he's one of the really, really good icons that I remember seeing play, and I mean there are others, but he's the one who sort of really kind of caught the imagination, so it's nice to be able to play with someone who I see as a really true icon. Scored some really nice goals, as people may have seen in tweets and stuff, so yeah, that's probably been a highlight. So whoever sorted out his licensing, thank you very much. But yeah, what were the lowlights this year? Are there any bugbears you have from the last couple of months particularly?
Yeah, for me, it's been the leaks. It's particularly the FUTMIS leaks. I can't stand them. I really, really do think that for someone like myself, the hype and the surprise around the 6 p.m. UK announcements and stuff like that is something that's important to me. I'm someone who falls under the category of being a bit burned out by the gameplay. So when stuff gets leaked out, it's a bit of a bummer for me. And I think another thing that kind of bothers me about it is it moves markets in a way that I think it's unhealthy and unfair. For a lot of the, I mean, not everyone that does trading is old enough to make, or maybe understands the market well enough to make their own decisions. I think a lot of people end up making investments where they lose huge portions of their wealth. And the tough part is if you only have 500k to your name and you put all 500k coins in this investment, and then something leaks out, or that was a manufactured leak or a fake leak or something like that, and then you end up losing 30% of that. That is something that I can't imagine how frustrating that would be. So leaks like that, stuff that gets out on Twitter, is a bummer.
I feel like it's tricky enough. It's always been tricky enough keeping track of the market and events that happen that affect the market, but the fact that leaks are now also having an impact, it's a whole other thing to kind of consider when you're looking at trading or buying players. And
it's almost more important to monitor hype and leaks and things of that nature, rather than just understanding the things that would move supply and demand. I mean, those are things that move supply and demand, I think, more than the actual packs and people playing the game and the natural demand that's created around players because of their competitiveness in game.
Yeah, definitely. And Luke, your low light so far?
This is a little unfair because I don't know the mechanisms that go behind it. I think it's something that's impacted all of us, and I think it flared up pretty badly this past weekend. But just the menu lag is really I know to an extent that there is clearly a server interface to how we're surfaced this stuff, but I've been playing just to kind of have a bit of a palate cleanser. I've been playing a lot of Madden Ultimate Team, and they completely redid the menu navigation. They redid the interface this past year, and just to go from FIFA to Madden, it's startling. It's so lightning quick. There's almost zero lag whatsoever going from menu to menu, even doing complicated things. And just in general, the polish of the menus and stuff like that, it just feels more like next gen 4K, you know, Xbox One X, PS4 Pro. It feels like they made that a point of emphasis. FIFA, you know, they have limitations, they have resources like everyone else. It feels a little bit too server side for me. I don't know how easy that is to remedy. I don't know why it is the way it is, so I don't want to unfairly attack, you know, whoever is responsible for that particular thing. But we've all had that, you know, I think we saw David Myler like list a player on open bid that was, you know, like a team of the group stage Ronaldo or somebody like that. That's gutting. Like that to have that happen because you hit up and then B and expecting it to do one thing and it did something different, that just sucks. So I guess that for me is the most disappointing. Like I don't know, some of the leak stuff is in their control. Some of the leak stuff probably isn't. I'm very sympathetic to the latter, where they do their best to keep it from getting out, and it gets out anyway. The menu stuff seems like something, though, that they could put resources into if they choose to. Whether they will or not, we'll have to see. Probably not this title. I doubt it's fixed for FIFA 18, but I really hope for FIFA 19 that they do take some time to figure out how to, you know, I know they have the downside of having built on top of like a hierarchy from a much older game than Madden, which has only had Ultimate Team for 2 or 3 years, 3 or 4 years, but whether that contributes to it is some sort of like server dead, I don't know. But it's just that for me, and just like seeing the frustrated tweets like in the FUTHEAD mentions, it just sucks. Like what can you, other than like I'm sorry that happened to you, what can you even say about that stuff?
Right.
My biggest bugbear this year is you know, you're ready to play a bit of FIFA, unwind, you got your team ready nicely, all kind of set up very well, and you're ready to get into maybe first game of FUT Champions for the weekend. Very, very excited for it, you know. I feel this weekend could be a good one. And then you get in there, the game's loading up, and then the opponent pauses like straight away. And then they rejig their team. You're just sitting there, probably like browse Twitter for a bit while you're doing it. They unpause like before the time's over and then score. It's my own fault for not concentrating properly, but both that and also the fact that, you know, you've got this constant pausing to change positions in game, it just totally takes away from the chemistry aspect of the game. I mean, yeah, there's still chemistry because you have to get a team. It's very immersion breaking, isn't it?
I've seen some people really rage about the biggest reason that they're doing it is, you know, to sort of get around chemistry. Like I'm kind of on the fence though. Like, well, one, I should say in full disclosure, for a while I did that. I had like a 4-3-2-1 that I would switch to a 4-1-2-1-2 in game. But I now just do a 4-1-2-1-2, and I might move some of my CMs around just to try and, you know, have like a little bit more defensive guy be at the CDM spot, or I might switch my strikers if I feel that they're not working as well as they should. Superficial stuff though, by and large. I think on one hand I'm like, okay, I think that we should reward people for being creative and figuring out, okay, if I put Jesus at CM, then I can get him to full chem. On the other hand, I feel like, no, we should, you know, let's be hardcore like chemistry supremacists, like no 5 chem, 3 chem, let's punish them for cheating the system. So I don't know like what the solve is there. I doubt, you know, they got rid of, you know, custom formations. Like, remember how awful those used to be, where like especially like someone would get a quick goal and then they would have like all 11 of their players be like right around the keeper. So thank goodness that's gone. Yep. But I don't know the easiest solve unless you like don't let substitutions happen other than until halftime, which is that really like the best solution? I don't know.
I mean, maybe the argument should be, obviously everything's EA's fault, so they need to make it more flexible, and they need to make sure that people can play players in different positions, and that would make things easier. At the same time, I don't want to just constantly come up against wingers converted to strikers, so I don't know. But that is basically what you end up playing now anyway, so maybe there is now an argument to vary up the chemistry to allow position changes further than they are now currently allowed. And there's that argument, plenty of you probably have heard people talking about this before, that you can have it so that a player can move maybe a couple of steps in either direction, so forward or back from their position or sideways or whatever. You couldn't convert a striker to centre back, but you can move them to wide positions, to central positions, just by a couple of moves rather than as much as you wanted, which is seems like a reasonable thing to ask. And the other thing just on that actually is that a lot of formations have very limiting sort of chemistry links. So like the 4-2-3-1 brackets 2, which we've talked about a lot, has loads of chemistry links, way more than some of the other formations, which just means most people again want to stick players in easy to link formations and then just change to a more difficult to link formation in game. So let's move on very quickly. We've got Jamie, we're going to talk to you about trading, and then we're going to chat very briefly about some of the team of the week, because the current team of the week is a really, really good one. So we want to cover a few players that we think are good. But first of all, as I said, Jamie, team of the year is on its way. What are your thoughts around the coming team?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll give the sort of elevator pitch here, since we have been discussing a lot today. Team of the year is likely coming. I'm sure if you guys have been, on Twitter, on Reddit, you've seen the leaks. Cannot confirm myself if they are true or not. I don't know. But what it looks like is there might be some sort of community team of the year, which I think on the news people got sort of freaked out. Any sort of change is something that to promotions tends to be something that spooks people, and I think we saw a lot of people listing up and liquidating their clubs for Team of the Year in anticipation of Team of the Year and some of the players that we might get because of this new format that EA are potentially doing. And you saw that some of the big boys have dropped a bit. Some of the baby icons have taken significant drops. Some of the high upper tier icons maybe haven't moved as much as you might, compared to some of the other players. Expensive golds, the likes of Ronaldo, Messi, Bale, those guys have dipped quite a bit as well. And I think now if you're looking to buy players, maybe stay away from the expensive golds, because those are the kind of cards that can get pushed down even more during Team of the Year, unless they are in the Team of the Year itself. So guys like Ronaldo, right now at 1.9 is not a bad price if you're just looking to build a squad. But if you're looking to get someone like Bale, who's probably not going to be a Team of the Year, he could be at a decent price right now to pick up. Or he would not be someone you want to pick up, I should say. So that's just something to keep an eye out. January 8th is probably when they're going to do it, if I had to guess. Other things to keep an eye out for: Player of the Month. Kane looks like the front runner in my opinion, but there's a pretty vocal minority that says it's going to be Coutinho. So I think there's an opportunity to sell until hype for if you do Coutinho investments.
And actually on that, I always back English players or heavily English British Isles linked players, because I think this panel does seem to be made up of like ex-pros, very much British based. Right.
Yeah, I agree. And the fact that he's broken the calendar year record is definitely going to be in his favor as well. And then other things to keep an eye out for: One to Watch SBC is likely going to get that again at the end of the month with the second wave of One to Watches. Winter refreshes, you can start looking at career mode upgrades and FIFA upgrades and downgrades, get an idea of who might be getting upgrades and downgrades. Those are the kind of cards, if you're looking to buy informs and One to Watches, now is actually a pretty good time. I think it's safe to say that we are in the equivalent of a panic sell right now, pre-Team of the Year panic sell. So guys like that are at decent prices right now. And then League SBCs, again, depending on when you're going to be looking at them again, they're likely going to be released this Friday. Obviously you should be prepping for that. And then finally Team League SBCs are probably going to be coming again at some point after Team of the Year. So if during Team of the Year prices get low enough of those 83s and 84s, you could look at that again. And I guess one final thing I do want to touch on really quickly, I have been printing coins with the bronze pack method recently. I haven't really been doing it. I hadn't really given it a proper go up until maybe a couple of weeks ago. It is something that I can unequivocally say is something that makes coins over the long run. Especially keeping the cards that you pack for marquee matchups and the like is definitely something that is, if you are looking just a slow way to grind out coins, it's not something I recommend you actively do. It's not that exciting, but if you are on like a car ride, for example, and you just have some spare time, maybe you're on a subway back from work, it's something that you could do and consistently make coins from.
And I think one of the tricks is don't sell your players, keep them in your club, and then when a marquee matchup comes out.
Right, exactly. Unless, the method that I've been using is basically if I open a pack, I look for the players that are either in a current, they're in a league that has a current league SBC out, usually I sell those, and then everyone else I store away for marquee matchups.
Great. And in terms of a final thing that I noticed was flipping of players at the immediate release of Team of the Week, because of loads and loads of Team of the Week packs being opened. It seemed to work quite well this week, didn't it?
It did, yeah. It worked really well. And I think a couple things played into that. Obviously, the Team of the Week packs was something that helped. It was a really good Team of the Week, so a lot more people than maybe an average Team League that would have incentivized people to do those Team League packs, because of how competitive it was, and this is one that's it's tough to make it not sound like a subtweet or the equivalent of a subtweet. There's a couple of influencers that usually stream Team League flipping. They did not stream Team League flipping this week, and generally that is something that sort of frees up the market a little bit and allows for maybe a more free market dynamic, which makes flipping a little bit easier.
That's quite interesting. And I think on that Team of the Week note, thanks very much for your roundup there, Jamie. Always very much appreciated by us all. We're going to move on to the Team of the Week itself. And of course, we're looking at this team on FUTHEAD.
Shameless ploy.
And yeah. So we have, it's a good one. It's heavily Premier League because of the games that were happening, which has made it particularly, as we mentioned before, appetizing to your FUT public. And one of the players that is sort of the marquee is, of course, that Dybala card. And then you've also got the Sanchez as well. Both wingers, both very good. And also both 3-star weak foot, which, I don't know, whenever I've played Sanchez, I've not necessarily found him a huge problem to deal with. I don't know whether that's the case for everyone, but Dybala, on the other hand, is incredibly difficult to play against, and no doubt loads of people will be using that card and switching him to striker in game. It looks a really good option. And then Pogba, of course, fantastic player. I've always found that he's never quite the finisher that you want him to be. His finishing isn't great, and I think because he's got this info now, that might change slightly. And quite a few Liverpool players in here. You got Firmino, Dele Alli, and obviously there are just loads of Premier League players, but he also looks very, very good. But the players that wanted to compare very quickly are actually two goalkeepers. You've got one Premier League player in Ederson, and you've also got Perrin, who's Italy's. Who does he play for? Genoa, I think it is. And actually, it looks like Ederson is obviously much more expensive, but actually they're both 85 rated, but Ederson is completely destroyed by Perrin on handling. Perrin has 88 handling, and Ederson has 80 handling. So if you look at their stats, they're pretty similar apart from that, and I think Perrin could actually be a really, really good option, and in a league where there are a fair few decent keepers, could outdo some of the better keepers in that league, to be honest. Jamie, have you got anyone you wanted to mention?
I'm looking at the striker Arnautovic. It's his second in form, 86 rated. There's going to be, right off the bat, I just have to say he doesn't have great agility, doesn't have great balance. This is going to be a sort of niche player that this is going to be effective for. But for someone like myself who plays very slow, methodical, I do a lot of shielding. I play the ball into my strikers, and typically they play sort of like a hold up style kind of play. This is someone that I'm definitely going to be looking into, maybe giving a try. If you put a hunter on him, some of his stats in theory go bonkers. He's got 95 acceleration, 93 sprint speed with a hunter card on him. Some of his finishing stats, he's got 91 and finishing, 97 shot power. His long shots aren't that great at 84, but you're probably not going to be using him for that in the role that he's probably going to take. He's got obviously ridiculous strength, 90 strength. And he's going to be one of those players that's going to be able to hold down the middle for you, and is going to be effective for someone like me. So I'm definitely going to give him a shot. And at 100K, he's really not that expensive for the quality of player that I think he is.
Yeah, and also he's got the 4-star skills, 4-star weak foot, doesn't he? Which is a nice combination on a big man. I'll quickly throw in another player or two players, a combination of players myself. We've got the young Nathan Ake as an inform this week, and he's one of those players that has really benefited from a massive upgrade. I mean, the boost on his card are really, really good. And I think a really underrated stat this year on centre-backs is agility. If you look at a lot of pro players using the likes of Rijkaard, he has very good agility, maybe even moving away from some of your traditional centre-back choices for the more agile players. Ake has 76 agility, but he also has 93 acceleration and 90 sprint speed with shadow on him, and 96 interceptions, 97 marking, 99 standing tackle, and 99 sliding tackle, as well as a solid 85 strength and 84 stamina. If you've got a Premier League team, he's not the tallest, but I'd definitely give him a go. The only thing I'd say about him is 71 aggression. If you think about some of your favourite defenders on this game, I think you'll probably find that they have quite high aggression. So I'm quite interested to know whether he really suffers from that, because it's a theory that I've had for a little while that aggression is actually quite important. So do give him a try and let us know what you think of him, if that aggression is a problem for you or not. another very agile centre-back. This time, Casio A centre-back, another centre-back who's not particularly easy to sort of strong link into a team. Very similar actually as in Kulu, but if you're looking at sort of a lower priced inform, maybe someone who's going to go up and you're going to use in your team. And Kulu is a good option. He's very, very nippy. He's not weak, but he's not as strong as Ake. But I think he'd be a decent option and someone that could certainly, offer a contrast to someone like Koulibaly perhaps. I have to say I've played a few games with him and I'm not quite sure I enjoy him so much this year. But make your own sort of judgment on that and give him a go and see what he's like. What are your thoughts, Luke?
No, you mentioned Ake, who I think is definitely is both at his price point and just in terms of his upgrade. I think he'd be the perfect fit for anybody that has kind of a Premier League back line going on. Sanchez was also mentioned, and I'm a guy, I know we were previously talking about some of the controversy of taking a 4-1 or a 4-3-1-2, 4-3-2-1 rather, and converting it in game to a 4-1-2-1-2. But previously in past FIFAs and early in this one, I did do that a lot. I'm guilty. I'm part of the problem, damn it. But I think Sanchez at kind of left forward or getting Willian, who's a little bit less expensive than Sanchez, a lot more expensive than an Ake type, and converting him to a right forward. I think both of those guys would make excellent second strikers, and kind of changing to a 4-1-2-1-2 in game. So I like those guys a lot. I think what Willian does really well is, especially in FIFA 17, I used his second special item, which I believe was his first inform after he had a team of the group stage or something. He was honestly, for me, kind of a cheap version of Georgie Best. Just kind of his stats, kind of his work rates. He's not obviously the icon level, legend level player, but you can play him at kind of a right wing or a right forward and then convert him to a cam in game, and he's effective enough. And this inform looks like it would do some of the same. I think if you want to get into the maybe this before I get into the really, really Rolls Royce level, certainly Dybala I think is going to be one that a lot of people covet. Dele Alli is a guy that I've liked a lot with his base item. I used him as kind of a center mid, honestly, for a while in a 4-1-2-1-2, and just his versatility, especially if you improve his defense through chemistry. I feel like he was just a really rock solid player at high medium, 4-star skills. I enjoyed him a lot as a CM. I feel like his this is probably just kind of a priming bias thing, but his personality in real life of just being kind of an instigator kind of bled into my using his non-inform when I had it untradeable, I think before I used it in SBC. He kind of, I think, got under the skin of some of my opposition, and I like that about him. But I think the big prize that everyone's going to covet is obviously Paul Pogba. His first inform was not at all worth the coins. This one is kind of starting to get there. There's still a little bit of a premium. I think it'll be interesting to see if we do, this team of the week will probably be out of packs before we get, team of the week packs or anything like that beyond the ones that were there at the beginning. So I don't know how much prices are really going to benefit on the super high end, but if there's not a promo early next week, or these guys will be long gone before we can truly reap the benefits of imagine getting an 89 Pogba for 700k had team of the year dropped, and who knows when that's coming, although I'll anticipate it very soon. I think that would have been quite nice. I still think that if as his price continues to fall, he's going to be an interesting option, just because Pogba, as we've seen the last two FIFAs, is just so overpowered in the middle. He's still at 900k or almost 1 million coins depending on the platform. I think better value than maybe a prime Vieira that's going to be untradeable. So he's a heck of a player, and anyone with the coin flow should probably honestly be saving it for team of the year. So I can't in good conscience recommend that, but I'm sure also anybody out there that has been sitting on an wants to watch Ederson has got that going for him now. I'm curious to hear. I've actually had problems with Ederson in Weekend League. His non-inform where he wants to watch is weirdly enough, the metrics don't really stand out, or I don't see anything traits or otherwise that make me really fear him. But for whatever reason, he's given me fit. So I'm not playing the Weekend League this month. At least I'm saying that. We'll see what happens come tomorrow. But I think he's a guy that I would be frustrated to go against if I had to play him in kind of a more competitive environment.
Yeah. Without a doubt. And actually, a couple more players, sort of lesser players here. Just like to give a shout out to Dendoncker, who's possibly the best Belgian centre back in the game, and Izquierdo, who is playing for Brighton, so is a Premier League player and just unbelievably rapid. Looks like he could properly fit into the meta with 4-star skills as well, and Colombian, which is I guess an added bonus, and then Juagliera, players who've played FUT for a long time and used a lot of players over the years will maybe have used him and know how ridiculous his long shots were back in previous games, and he's really good fun. I don't know whether he's obviously not a meta player and he's not going to be used much, but if you've got a novelty team and you want to give someone a go, I think he could be an interesting one. And then the less said about Dejan Lovren, the better. I think on that it is actually time to move on. So apart from sort of I think actually there's only a couple of players we haven't mentioned, and sort of bigger players in Lingard and Firmino, who look very good as well, but I think that's about it. So I suppose all there is left to say is, Luke, where can people catch up with you if they want to catch all your thoughts on American football?
Yeah, this is my personal Twitter account, though my personal FIFA account I'm sure is Bants in its own right. My personal Twitter account, my previous life, for those that don't know, is I was a journalist that covered American football, so I still enjoy watching it in kind of more of a fan perspective now. It's obviously a big deal here living in North America. I alienate my American football followers, by tweeting about FIFA and football, and I alienate my FIFA followers by tweeting about American football. So everyone hates me. I'm the most hated 8,000 whatever follower person on Twitter, but you can follow me at LukeZim, LukeZim. Certainly many of you guys already follow at FUTHEAD, and you see many of my unfunny jokes and memes there. And then certainly, I'm on FUTHEAD News, futhead.com/news. So I'm either editing or writing most of those, so definitely don't be shy and say hi.
There's also plenty of dog pics, right, as well?
Yeah, I got a dog, adopted it about a month and a half ago. It only barked once during the recording of this podcast, and I don't think we managed to get it. I think I was able to mute my mic in time, so that's impressive. I think it has to go out really badly, so Lord willingly.
Well, I'm glad it's got good mic discipline already.
Lord willingly, I'm not going to find a treat waiting for me when I get off this podcast, because that would not be so good, but...
And also, obviously, Jamie, there's a bit of a connection here because you've been writing stuff for FUTHEAD, along with a friend of the podcast, Wise FIFA, as well. What kind of stuff have you got up on FUTHEAD these days?
So Wise is a really good series where he looks at the one to watch and Path to Glory market. He does a pretty tactical breakdown of like player price movements and stuff like that. So it's definitely something worth checking out. And he also does some pretty cool stuff with basically just marquee matchup predictions, which has been really extraordinarily difficult to nail down this year. EA have I think they have a dartboard in their office, and they just cover their eyes and just randomly throw darts, and wherever it lands in the on their board of, I don't know, this analogy is sort of going nowhere, but they have a very strange way of choosing marquee matchups this year.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. So he's doing a sort of good bit of donkey work for no reward, is what you're saying.
Well, I mean, it's good to, marquee matchups is a good way to prepare, and then you can actually make a lot of coins just by buying the predictions that people have, especially the popular predictions, the ones that go on FUTHEAD and other websites and maybe on YouTube and stuff like that. Basically buying those early, selling into the hype, and then quickly buying the requirements when they come out. That's really how you make money with marquee matchups this year.
Well, I thought we were just saying goodbye, but we seem to have a trading tip as well. So that's what you get with the @FUT_economist, which is where you can find him on Twitter. As long as you didn't plug yourself there. And also on Twitch as well, of course, FUT Economist. Right. I might be there at some point if Jamie invites me. Definitely. Yeah, Luke, thanks very much for joining us again. It's been a pleasure to have you on. Always great to have your insight. You know a lot of stuff which many people don't find out, and it's always interesting to kind of hear that.
Thanks so much for having me back.
Absolute pleasure. And again, thanks very much, Jamie. And of course, thanks to you all listeners for joining us this week. And we hope you have a great start to the year. We hope you're looking forward to Team of the Year, which may or may not be out by the time we do our next podcast. And have a very good weekend. See you soon. Happy New Year once again, and don't forget to start that 2018 off right with a subscription to FUT Weekly Podcast. Of course, it's absolutely free, and you can do it on your various podcasting platforms. If you need to know more about that, just go to futweeklypodcast.com/subscribe.